Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zolotech, and Apple Watch is one of those devices that typically gets pretty decent battery life. But if you want to get even more, whether you've recently updated to a different version or you're just having a little bit of issues and you want to get more power out of it, I wanted to share with you some Apple Watch battery tips and tricks. We'll go over what Apple has to say can save you power and also a couple other things that can help as well. Now, the first thing Apple says is make sure that you're updated, and that's typically what they say, whether that's iOS or watchOS or anything else. But go to your watch app, go to General, and go to Software Update. Whether you're running the public version or a beta, make sure you're on the latest one so that you have the latest bug fixes, security updates, and other optimizations as well. Once you have that, the first thing you may want to check has to do with something we've seen on iOS as well, called background app refresh. So if you go back into your settings, go back under General, scroll down, you'll see background app refresh. You may want to disable this to save yourself some power. In fact, Apple actually says turning off background app refresh may preserve battery life. This setting also controls background access to data you've given apps permission to read. Apps with complications on the current watch face will continue to refresh even when the background app refresh setting is off. So you may want to disable this for one or everything, and if you have, but you still use different complications on your Apple Watch, these still may use background app refresh data. So make sure this is optimized based on what you're trying to get out of it. Typically the ones I have here with Lumi in the middle, we have compass, music, and then the weather. Those don't seem to use a lot of power for me, so I just keep those and then just turn this off in general, and that should help. But you can keep it on if you want, or just turn it off entirely. Now, if you talk a lot with your hands or maybe you move around a lot, Apple actually says you may want to try turning off raise to wake. So anytime you have this on your wrist and it's off or just on the always on display, we give it just a second or cover it here to turn it off, pick it up, it wakes it up. That uses power every time it brightens the display like that. If you want to turn that off and see if that helps you out, go into your settings. Go down to display and brightness here. So you just scroll down to display and brightness and then scroll towards the bottom and you'll see wake on wrist raise. If you disable this, it will no longer do that. So if I put this back on my wrist and with the display off or on the always on display, you'll see that it's still dim. If I tap here, it goes into the app. We can also wake it by moving the digital crown. So that's something you may want to consider disabling if you actually see it turn on an awful lot. Also, you may want to consider disabling the always on display if it's something you think is using a lot of power. I don't think it uses a ton for me. Apple can actually lower this to 1 Hz refresh rate, and also on the Apple Watch Ultra 2, they can dim it way down compared to what it was before. But if you want to save even additional power, again, under your display and brightness settings, just turn off the always on display. I typically don't look at my watch when it's laid down this way as I can't see it, so it doesn't make a huge difference for me. So it may save some overall battery life, but I haven't noticed a huge difference there. Also, something else you may want to consider under display and brightness has to do with the brightness itself. So it does go pretty bright. Default is typically in the middle. I turn it up a little bit, but you could turn it way down and let it manage itself there. It just depends on how well you can see or how bright you want the display. The more dim, typically the less power it uses. Additionally, with your display, if we scroll down, let's get out of this, we'll scroll down here toward the bottom, you'll see wake duration. Under wake duration, make sure you have it on 15 seconds, because then it will go back to sleep after 15 seconds, saving more power. I only have it on 70 seconds while I'm filming videos, so it doesn't go to sleep while I'm demonstrating something. So typically you want to leave it on 15 seconds unless you need it specifically for something else. Now, with the Apple Watch, chances are one of the reasons you picked one up is because you want to use some of the sensors on it, whether that's the heart rate monitor or advanced health tracking such as blood oxygen and more. Apple will actually check some of this information throughout the day, which does use more power, and you can disable that if you don't want it to do that and you want to check it manually. In order to do that, we'll go into our settings here. You can do this on the iPhone app as well, but go into settings, scroll down, keep scrolling down until you see privacy and security. Under privacy and security, scroll down again until we get to health. Under health, you have heart rate, blood oxygen, and wrist temperature. You have other things as well. So if we go into this, we can disable this so it doesn't check it throughout the day, and it will only check it when we want to check it manually. I typically leave this on because I like these features. It was designed to use it. But again, if you want to save even more power, you can turn that off. The same is true with blood oxygen. You could disable that one. or any of the ones it checks regularly. So if you're using this maybe for different tracking methods, you can turn that off as well. And of course, again, you're fully limiting the features of this, but if you just picked it up to be a watch or you just want notifications, you could disable that and save a ton of power. Now, additionally, under privacy and security, location services is going to use more power, such as the GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. Now, I typically would not recommend turning this off as we use this to track different things normally. So that will save you some power if you turn this off, turn off Share My Location or Find My, but again, you're limiting features to what the watch was designed for. So I would typically leave these on, but you could turn them off altogether just like you can on your iPhone if you really want to. But if you're wanting to use maybe the emergency SOS features and more, I'd typically leave those on just to keep yourself safe if you're in a bad situation. Now, another thing that you can change that will limit some of the power usage has to do with it listening to our environment as far as the overall noise and loudness of it. Now, one way you can limit that is not use the complication that actually checks for that. But if we go into the control center here, you'll see if we go down, you've got the little hearing icon, and you can see different levels of things. And again, you can see different things if we go into the app that does the same thing. So if we go into the little ear here, it will listen to our environment. However, it can notify you when you're in too loud of an environment, and you may want to disable that because it's going to use more power. So if we go into settings, and then we go down to noise, within noise, you'll see environmental sound measurements. If we turn this off, it won't use it in the background, and you'll save a little bit of an additional power. This is something I leave on as I actually appreciate this and want to save my hearing a little bit, but if you're not in loud environments, it really doesn't matter. Now, Bluetooth is quite low power, and to save battery, you actually want to keep it enabled on your iPhone. It's low power on the iPhone and the Apple Watch, and this is specifically from Apple. According to Apple, they say specifically that disabling Bluetooth on your iPhone increases the battery drain on your Apple Watch. For more efficient communication between the devices, keep Bluetooth enabled on iPhone. You can actually disable it on your Apple Watch with Bluetooth to make it forced to go over to Wi-Fi, which will use a little bit more power. But if you're installing an update, sometimes that can speed it up. But typically you want to leave Bluetooth enabled on both devices, as that's the lowest power form of communication between the devices. So it's something I would recommend you leave on. Now, if we go back over to the iPhone and go into the Apple Watch app, and we go down to notifications, you may want to limit some of the notifications that are coming across to your Apple Watch. These actually will wake the display up, give you haptic feedback if there's notifications and you're not in a focus mode, and you'll see notification indicator. You can turn it off altogether, turn them all off altogether, or customize this based on what you care about most. So it says show notifications on wrist down. If you don't want to show those, turn that off when your wrist is down. If you do want to show them, leave it on. But again, every time you get a notification, it will wake up the device and notify you in one way or another. So you may want to fully customize this based on your actual needs, whether you want to turn off a specific app, whether that's podcasts or tips or walkie-talkie, one of those, but leave on others, you may want to disable them. The same is true for all your third-party apps as well. So disable this based on what you care about most. Of course, leave the notifications that you actually want to use it for as well. Going along with notifications, you may want to turn off notifications for activity as well. If we go into the activity settings, you'll see it says to allow notifications for activity or turn them off entirely, and we can customize this based on our needs. I would recommend customizing this rather than turning it off if you use activity at all. So you can enable or disable stand reminders, daily coaching, goal completions, special challenges, or activity sharing notifications. So you can turn those off based on what you care about. If you don't want stand reminders, disable it. You won't get those reminders, it won't light up the watch, and it won't wake it up using more power. So lots of little customizations for notifications that can make a big difference. Something else that could make a difference is maybe you've got an Apple Watch that uses cellular and you're in an area you know that you don't have cellular data, and maybe you've only got your Apple Watch on you, but you don't have your iPhone. If you don't have your iPhone nearby, it's going to default to cellular here, and you may want to turn off cellular if you're actually in an area without any coverage. You can do that just in your control center, go into your cellular settings, and turn it off altogether. If you're in an area that has cellular connectivity, then I would leave it enabled, of course, then you'll get your notifications and more. But maybe you're somewhere very remote where you don't have it. That may be something you want to disable to get a little bit more battery life out of your watch altogether. And going along with notifications, you can use different things such as focus modes to help with that as well, whether that's do not disturb or a sleep mode. So if you've got those enabled, that will really limit how much it's waking up the display and what you're doing throughout the day with it. So that's something I would encourage going into your focus modes, customizing on your iPhone and watch as well. I have full videos on how to do that as well. When you're using your Apple Watch to work out, whether you're running or walking, you can actually save power by turning on low power mode just specifically for workouts, or you can customize this again. We'll go into our settings here, and within settings, scroll all the way down to workout. Under workout, you'll see low power mode. It says turn on low power mode during a workout, and you can learn more about it. It tells you exactly what it disables, things with sensors and more we'll talk about in just a moment, but you can actually do that while you're working out, and then as soon as you're done working out, it will turn that mode off. Or during low power mode, you can also, to save even more power on the Apple Watch Ultra, have it check fewer GPS and heart rate readings. So that's something you can enable if you want to do that, where it says preserve battery life in running and hiking workouts by reducing the frequency of GPS and heart rate readings and turning off alerts and splits. Certain metrics will be unavailable. So you've got that, as well as some other customizations here as well. So you can really limit the battery usage if you need this to last all day long or multiple days if maybe you're out hiking or camping somewhere. Additionally, you can enable low power mode on your own by using Siri to do that. Or if we go into our watch here and tap on our battery in the control center, we can just enable low power mode here. And again, if you do enable low power mode, which I definitely would not do this regularly unless you're trying to get back to a charger, you'll see it says it turns off the always on display, limits sensors, as well as the cellular and Wi-Fi connections of your Apple Watch. Notifications may be delayed and emergency alerts may not arrive. This will turn off features such as background heart rate measurements, heart rate notifications, irregular rhythm notifications, blood oxygen measurements, and gestures such as double tap. So they're really telling you that this is going to disable almost everything on the watch, and it will basically only be a watch. So I don't typically recommend using low power mode unless you don't want any of those things, because it's great to have some of those measurements, or maybe you fall, you get in a crash, something like that. It can really help you in those situations. So I wouldn't recommend low power mode unless you just really need to get back to a charger and don't have a lot of power. I also wanted to mention what Apple has to say about battery health and also how I charge. We'll talk about that in a moment, but if we go into our settings, scroll down to battery, we'll go under battery here. If we go into battery, scroll down to the bottom, go to battery health, you'll see optimized battery charging. It's enabled by default with optimized charge limit, where it holds the battery at 80% when you charge it at night or in the morning at a regular schedule, and you have location services enabled. As long as you have most of those enabled, it will optimize this over time, learn your overall charging patterns, and then preserve the battery. I put this on the charger every night before I go to bed, and it charges at a pretty slow 5 to 7.5 watts, depending on what charger you're using. So the heat's not really a factor there, and it just seems to trickle charge it for the most part. And if we scroll down, you'll see my maximum capacity is 100%. Now, this is an Apple Watch Ultra 2, so it's fairly new, but my Apple Watch Ultra 1, my previous Series 7 Apple Watch, lasted 100% for an entire year. So I've had no issues with that whatsoever, wearing it just about every day, charging it every night. If I'm not wearing it, it just sits on a charger and holds at 80%. So I've had no issues there, and Apple actually recommends using optimized battery charging. Additionally, they do still say to keep it out of too cold or too hot environments. Specifically, 32 degrees to 95 degrees Fahrenheit is where it was designed to live, about 0 to 35 C, and that's what they say for ambient temperatures. So you don't really want to use it regularly in areas where it's hotter than that. However, I recognize, of course, that areas in the world are hotter than that just by default. But that's what it was optimized for, just like the iPhone, and when you're hotter than that, well, it may actually degrade the battery a little bit faster. But that's what Apple says. So if you're storing it, they recommend -4 Fahrenheit to 113 degrees Fahrenheit or -20 to 45 C. So just keep that in mind. Typically, you don't want to keep this too hot, but one thing that's really nice is I've used this in the sun. Being that this is titanium, it actually stays fairly cool, so that helps a lot. But in general, I think it lasts pretty well compared to what we get with the iPhone 14, for example. So those are a few different tips and tricks to help you get the most out of your Apple Watch, its battery life, and battery health. If you have anything else to mention, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Maybe a different tip you've actually found has made a difference for you. And of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.